Good evening, good night, wherever you are. We are back. We are back. Guess who is back? Yes, you have joined us on the Champions Table on Love Bay Radio family. I missed you, but I'm back. And we have a great episode today, Living in Purpose on Purpose. And we got a special guest with us today. Once again, as you know, we have intentional conversations, real conversations with real people to motivate you, to inspire you. And today we got a special guest, Miss Stephanie Joseph Flats. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Stephanie's experience spans corporate marketing and entrepreneurial ventures. She has helped shape global brands and launched her own off menu, a consulting agency serving up marketing and branding by request, formerly SJF Marketing and Branding Agency. Over the last 16 years, her work covers strategy, branding, design, content creation across industries, including lifestyle, sports and entertainment, art, health and wellness, fashion and beauty, finance, and travel. A passionate speaker, guest lecturer, mentor, Stephanie shares her expertise through panels, events, and academic programs. In 2024, she launched the Stephanie Joseph Flats Leadership in Marketing Scholarship at George Brown College, supporting Black students in marketing. She also serves several DEI committees and helping drive progress and representation in the industry. And as we say every single week, men talk, women talk, but the truth can't lie and the truth will set you free. Please join me in welcoming Miss Stephanie Joseph Flats to the Champions Table.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
That was a very nice welcome. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Most definitely. Most definitely. So first and foremost, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's Carnival Caravana week in Toronto, so I feel like the vibes and just the mood is just high. So
Yeah. Big energy,
good.
big energy.
Big.
Big energy for the weekend. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm excited about the weekend too. The weather is good. The weather is good here in Toronto. I like it hot. I don't
Yeah.
mind it being hot. So I'm glad that it's hot in Toronto and it's an exciting weekend for us. Yeah. So we're going to get into it, have a conversation with you, find out who you are. I was excited, saw your page on Instagram and saw you doing some really amazing things. So I said, let me tap in and find out who you are and then kind of share you with the rest of the world for those who don't know you. All right. So let's start off with the first question is, who is Miss Stephanie Joseph Flats? Tell us how, where'd you grow up? What was your life like, before you got into what you're doing now?
Yeah. Okay. So, who am I? What a question. So I was born in Montreal. Grew up in Toronto, or the East End, if you want to call it that. And I have, like, my parents are in my life, my brother, my sister-in-law. I have two nieces and a nephew. I'm like giving you my family history only because we're all so extremely close, and so they're very important to me. But just to kind of tie my story back to maybe even what I do and the fantastic intro that you gave me. When I was younger, I was always just a fan of storytelling, and I would write in any notebook that I could get my hands on. And so, like, when my parents would be bringing back, toys and stuff, I'd be like, okay, get me that 5-star notebook. Like, that's what I want. And just so that I could write all these stories. And I actually have a ton of them still underneath my bed that I kind of go back to, and I always think back to, like, oh wow, like what a creative young mind I was. And so that kind of led into my love for creativity and wanting to get into the field that I'm in now, and knowing that I'm both a creative person and very analytical. It's kind of the perfect career for me, and so I feel like I was destined for the career that I'm in now. Let me know if you want more of a
Awesome.
backstory.
That's awesome. I noticed you said something. You said used to be. You're still that. You're definitely still that. That hasn't
But
changed. You
yeah,
know.
the younger we are,
Yeah.
we're, you know,
it's a different, well, you still have those books, so you can always go back to that younger self and make sure that, you're keeping consistent and that person is happy, right?
Oh, 100%.
That's it.
I'm keeping that like young me happy all the time. Like I still write. It's still a very big passion of mine. And so it's something that I get to do, I guess, as a hobby in terms of like wanting to write a book one day and all that stuff. But then also in my career, being able to storytell with brands and with individuals, it's pretty cool that I get to live out the childhood dream in just different ways than I'd imagined.
Okay. So you started to get into that next question I was going to ask you. So when did you realize that marketing and branding was one of your passions, I should say?
Geez. So I guess knowing that I love storytelling, what really made it clear to me that marketing was the avenue that I needed to go down was there was this movie, and I won't say the name of it, but there was a movie back when I was in high school. So this would have been like 20 something years ago. And the two stars or the two leads were advertising execs pitching a campaign to Nike. And I loved how, again, like how creative it was, but then how strategic they had to be. And I was like, oh, this is me in a nutshell. Like this would be the most perfect job for me. And then watching that movie coupled with the fact that growing up, anytime I would see any brand, I'd always wonder, like, what is the strategy behind this brand? Or how did they create this ad? So when I'm looking at an ad, it might be a bit different than others. Like they might just be seeing something that's trying to persuade them versus I'm looking at, like, why did they choose this color? Why is the copy that way? Why did they choose this angle? Or if it's packaging, I'm looking at, is it functional, or like, is it just functional, or do they care about design? Do they want it to be an experience? Or if it's a logo, and my mind would just always spin that way. And so I knew that this was the career for me because I get to do all of that every day for the last 16 years. Like no day is the same, but every day includes a bit of strategy, that analytical side, and then also a ton of creativity.
That's pretty awesome. So how you view things is totally different than the regular person, then, you would say.
I think about that sometimes. Like if you think of, like, I guess, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what other industry there is, but say you're a chef. Like if you're going to go out and dine somewhere else at another restaurant, you're critiquing that meal a little bit differently, right? Because you have the skill set to make it better, or you just know what goes into it. So for me, when I'm like engaging with the world, I feel like the moment is like, oh, that was a good, like, that's a good brand move, or that was strategic, or like that color pairing is great, or whatever the case is, my mind doesn't turn off. And so, yeah, it's a lot going on up there.
That's good. That's good. You see the world from a different perspective that we who don't see it that way, or don't see it that way as much as you do, we definitely appreciate it. You make our world definitely more exciting than it usually is, right? So yeah, we thank you for that. So here's my question for you. So for this new generation wanting to do what you do, what do you think has changed?
So there's like a fun answer, and then there's a more serious answer. The fun answer would be the world is just.
I want both. I want both. By the way,
I'm going to give you both. Industry is just different. Like when I was growing up in this industry, especially living in like the city and working at whether it was agency or corporate, but in marketing or the advertising world, it was just so different. It was so fun. I feel like it was very like event experiential heavy. You were constantly at events 4 times a week. Like that still exists now, but it's more so for influencers and creators versus back then it was for those of us that like made the brand decisions. And so you were getting invited to like extravagant events. Like it was over the top. And so now that doesn't exist anymore. Those dollars don't exist to invite just the planners because you may, or not just the planners, but those who are strategic behind the scenes. Yes, you're decision makers, but you might not have the same scale as like an influencer or a creator. And so they want those types of folks at the table or at those events. And so just from the fun standpoint of how crazy it used to get back in the day, like that is no longer a thing. But then in many other ways, it's changed for the good. For example, the fact that diversity inclusion wasn't a big focus back then. Now it's almost an expectation, or it is an expectation. And so I've loved to see that progression since 2020. And at the company that I was at on the corporate side, committees started to be built, and I was part of this marketing D&I committee, where my job, or my role specifically, volunteer role within the company, was to focus on inclusive marketing. And so how do we go to every single team that has marketing campaigns out in the world? How do we make sure that they're more inclusive, more diverse? How do we make sure that we, give each of them a goal of, this percentage of representation needs to be there by next year? And so it was really cool to see, especially a company I was working for, actively do this, like the steps that most companies are preaching about, but maybe not actually doing. What else is there? I would say that what else has changed? Access has changed quite a bit. And so back then, when I was starting in the industry, there was no social media. Like, I'm sure we had Facebook, but there was no Instagram or any of that. And so I think Instagram started maybe 3 or 4 years after I graduated from college. And so now the fact that you could start your own business from home, you can connect with your audience from home. You don't have to work for a big corporation. You don't necessarily have to get brand deals and all this backing. You could really build a voice for yourself. Like, that access has definitely changed things, which I find quite interesting, especially because I don't know if I'd consider myself an old school marketer, because I'm still quite new school, I'd say, but it is fascinating to see the young up and coming marketers who are just so savvy with technology, and that they could decide tomorrow, I'm going to start a brand, and it could just be that they know how to go viral and they know how to follow trends and things like that. I find that to be quite interesting. And then maybe one other thing I would say is, although those changes have come and the world of marketing has evolved, the foundation of like being a good storyteller, being creative, knowing how to analyze data, knowing how to connect with an audience, like all those, I guess, foundational skills still need to be there.
Fundamentals.
Yeah. And so I notice with the younger generation that it's not there. For a lot of them, it is. For some of them, it's not. It's quite interesting for me. And sorry, this is like such a long-winded answer.
All good.
Even in running my agency, I was in corporate for 16 years, running my agency for 15. And when the pandemic started, and then all of a sudden TikTok became a thing, and then Reels on Instagram became a thing. And our generation, we're not used to creating random content. We're not dancing on the gram. We've never done that before. But this younger generation totally, picked that up, and they were able to run with it. And so I would notice these different marketing accounts that would pop up. And once you go onto their page and actually go to their website and read their about, I'm, digging at this point. So I want to know the information. And I'd see that they only have 1 year of experience. But what they've done was a fantastic job showing up on social media, which then makes brands and individuals want to work with them. And that really did change the game for a lot of us who've been in it for quite some time, because it's you can't now just depend on the fact that you're knowledgeable, that you have over a decade's worth of, experience. You really have to show up on these platforms in the way that people expect you to. And so, so much has changed, and so much is currently changing. So good and bad, but mostly good for the younger generation.
Okay. So let me ask you this question, because you said something. You said influencers at the table. So talk about that. What do you mean by that when you say influencers are now at the table?
So back then, and when I say back then, I'm talking about maybe when did I graduate? In 2009. So 2009, 2010, there were no creators, there were no influencers. Obviously, maybe some of us were that without knowing what that was, but there wasn't a social platform that you could go on and promote a product that a brand gave you for free, right? That didn't exist. And so once that did come about, we now see just how important it is to have these influencers and creators on social media and what they can do for a brand. Because right now, the younger generation, especially Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which was my area of focus in my last role before I left corporate, they're listening more so to the influencers and creators and their friends and family than they are going to listen to just a brand ad. And so although you still need to put out that big campaign, and in some cases, you definitely need to layer in some sort of creator strategy so that they feel like someone that they can relate to and that they trust is talking to them about this product. And so obviously there's a way that people can be like scammed in some senses. Like if someone decides to, promote a product that they don't really believe in, but you can kind of see through that quite quickly, especially if you're following someone for quite a long time. And so like for yourself, if you were all of a sudden like, I don't know, I'm going to throw like I don't know what a random product is, but something that you
Yeah.
don't really necessarily care about, if you started to promote that, anyone that follows you, whether you have a big following or not, is going to be like, something seems odd there. And now
Yeah.
the fact that you have to put ad whenever you are promoting something, so the minute someone sees that it's tied to money and then it doesn't really align with your brand, you just seem inauthentic, right? And so
Yeah. That's powerful. So there's a level of it factor nowadays, is what it sounds like.
Oh,
Yeah.
there is. And even if you aren't considered a creator or influencer, like just putting that aside, because I don't consider myself one, but if you are a brand, or if you are the brand, or if you have a brand, you are required to put yourself out there. And so for someone like myself that maybe presents as if I'm an extrovert, but I'm actually an introvert, it's quite hard knowing that like my business depends on me being out there and communicating with folks and engaging, and them seeing kind of my life or my accomplishments or how I go about my day to day. Like it's a lot, but it's now an expectation because of social media.
Yeah. That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's a lot. Take it in, folks. This is good intel.
And there's
Yeah.
probably so much more.
So what's that?
Like there's probably also so much more that I just don't want to ramble on about, but it's a lot.
Trust me, you're not rambling. You're giving some good intel for us to know about, so that's great. Let me see. I was going to ask, okay, so here's my question. In this evolving industry, so how do you stay relevant? That's my question.
Great question.
Yeah.
And it's a topic that comes up quite often with those of us in the industry, because marketing and branding evolve so quickly. Like if you just think of social media as just one sector of marketing, and so there's so many others, and they're all changing constantly. And sometimes you feel like to stay relevant you have to be up on the trends, but I actually don't think that that's it. Like obviously the trends are there for a reason, but for me it's about staying curious and staying connected and making sure that I'm really understanding what's happening in the world when it comes to marketing. So not only do I follow what's happening in the Canadian marketing landscape, but I'm also very much up to speed on what's happening in the US, in the UK, and where else? In the US and the UK. And I feel like there's one more spot that I'm missing. Sometimes Australia. It depends, but definitely the US and the UK, they push it, especially the UK. They've really, really pushed the boundaries. And so I like to stay up to speed that way. And so that could be in the form of just like me going to different websites, getting newsletters, following certain accounts on social media, just to make sure that I'm always, in the know of what's going on or what new technology is out there. China also, or Asia, just ahead of the curve quite frequently. And then also to stay relevant, any project that I'm working on, whether it's on the corporate side or with my business, I'm always trying to learn something new. So whether it's about the audience of the client I'm working with, or the platforms that we're working with, or the people that I'm collaborating with, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, like what's new here? What did I not know before? How can I take, however this specific industry operates or this specific brand, and just apply that knowledge to any client I'm working with moving forward, is something that I often do. What else is there? I'd say I also make, it's important to me to really get inspiration from art and culture, conversations I'm having, like the one that we're having now. I might leave this conversation and be like, oh, that kind of sparked an idea. Or, in speaking with you and the types of questions you ask, like maybe, that inspires something. But because I'm a lover of art and culture, I tend to kind of weave that into any of the storytelling that I do with brands as well. And then what else? How you stay relevant. A big one that was talked about yesterday.
Does travel help you stay relevant?
Well, I guess I'd put travel in my culture. I do travel a lot.
Okay.
Call me out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just saying. I think with travel would
Yeah,
definitely, keep you relevant.
it
It's one
does.
thing to see something, on social media or whatever, but actually to experience it and go there, it's
Yeah,
totally different, right? Totally
it's
different experience.
And I think
Yeah,
that's where like I would bucket that probably under culture and then even the arts because I would experience that while I'm in whatever country that I'm in. But yeah, definitely everything inspires me. Even on like my recent trip, like just hotel experiences. I'm thinking that through from every single touch point, or if we're at a restaurant, or just it cannot, I feel like to say how the country operates is like too too broad, but just every experience I'm thinking through from a marketing standpoint of like, if you want more people to visit, like what is this experience like? Or yeah, as I said, it's always top of mind. But another big one that was I talked with friends about yesterday was to stay relevant. And it wasn't around staying relevant, but this is relevant to that conversation, lack of better
yeah,
words.
all good.
Is listening. And it sounds quite simple, but listening to your audience, your employees, if you want to stay relevant with that audience, you need to listen to them. And oftentimes I feel people will listen or will read maybe feedback from their audience. And if it's positive feedback, oh, amazing, let's repost this and share it with the world. But if it's negative feedback, how often are you really going back and maybe reworking your systems, or taking a look at your product or the experience and really listening to your target and the people that are really going to build your business, but then again also listening to those that you work with or those that work for you. I find that helps me stay relevant as well. So I have a couple employees that work for my agency, and then also freelance some folks that come in and help on larger projects if I don't have the capacity. And so listening to them to make sure that they understand, like, I don't know everything. You might know more than me in a specific area, or you just might have your ear closer to the ground on that specific industry that you're working on. And so it benefits me to make sure that I'm listening.
That's powerful. That's a powerful, and that's great leadership, right? Leadership in the sense of listening to the people around you, because it really makes what you're doing a lot better, right?
It
So
does.
tell me about this, the whole off menu, the name, like where'd that come about? How'd that come about?
Yeah, so like you said in the intro, my
Mm,
agency for the last, I guess, because we've been 15 years now. So for the last maybe 14 to 15, it was called SJF Marketing and Branding Agency. And that's kind of what I went by. I loved it. It's my initials. Like, what's more meaningful to you than, your own personal
your
branding?
name.
And so
Hmm.
I loved it and rocked with it. But I was also in the corporate world at the same time. Once I left the corporate world, I was at an event and I felt like God kind of positioned everything in the right way. And it was my second to last day. I was at this Women's Month event, and everybody had to make introductions. And so I hadn't yet figured out, like, oh, what's my new introduction? Like, I'm now leaving the corporate world, doing this full time, even though I've been doing it full time, but doing
Right.
this full time.
Right.
What is my new intro? And so when I spoke and I was like the first to go, it wasn't as smooth as I had hoped that it would be. And typically, like, I have that stuff like nailed down. And so
Right.
even when I said what the name of the agency was, I think people are kind of like, oh, like, what is that? Or like, what's SJF? And some of the other folks, most of the women at the table worked for some big global brands in Canada and were like head of marketing, like fantastic, inspirational women. And then there was a few of us who owned our own agencies. And I noticed that the other women who owned their agencies, they all had these really creative names. And I went home that night and was like, I don't feel the pressure to change the name because I do think that it still makes sense. Like, if you hear of a lot of PR companies, they often have the initials of whoever the founder is
Mhm.
attached to the word PR. But then there are a ton of agencies who have some sort of creative word or a set of words that makes you kind of think like, they must be creative folks because this is pretty cool. And so I'm like, let me
Mhm.
figure this out. And I put up these big white post-its in my home and
Okay.
went through. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to have a name that's still to do with my initials or just me, what would those names be? And then the second was if I were to have a name to do with food, because I'm such a foodie, it's ridiculous,
Right.
then what
Right.
could those names be? And then the third post-it was around if I were to have a name around reading, writing, just because, again, another passion of mine. And so I come
Hmm.
up with some pretty cool names, and it was really hard to get down to one. But the reason that I chose off menu, one, it speaks, if the minute you hear the name and you know me well, you're just like, ah, this is still very you, just as much as SJF is.
Right.
Fact that when you order something off menu, it means that it's not on the menu. Sometimes for folks, I have to specify that. And it's something that you have to be in the know about. It's like an if you know, you know thing. It's the chef making this custom made to order meal for you, or dish for you. And it's quite personalized and highly regarded type of thing. And I'm like, that is exactly what the agency is. I've never had to promote the agency ever in the 15 years. And so it really is an if you know, you know. And then when someone does come to us and request, so I always have that line of marketing and branding by request. When someone does come to us and request marketing or branding, I am really customizing and personalizing your experience and making sure that you feel that whatever we're serving you, and all these little terms of like the chef lingo, but whatever we're
Dope,
serving
dope, dope. Yeah,
is,
yeah.
it really is catered to you and your brand. And that you, sometimes they'll joke around and say, like, you come hungry and you leave on brand, and just like little playful things. So I absolutely love it. It's now allowed us to be a lot more playful, just even in the branding that we have for ourselves. And the agency did quite well before with word of mouth, but now I think it's almost double, just because people really like the name and they just like to
Yeah, yeah,
associate
yeah.
themselves with the name and the branding and how the website looks and all that stuff. So yeah, it's been pretty cool. But it's been that new name for maybe about 4 or 5 months now. So still getting
Okay.
the, but I absolutely love it.
Yeah, yeah, I like it too. I think what I heard too when you said that is I hear off menu, but I also hear outside the box,
Yeah.
right? So it's out definitely outside the box, something new, something customized, created. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
cool. That's dope. That's dope. That's definitely a dope brand. So is that how you create? I heard you bring out the clear boards, and is that sort of part of your creative process that you go through?
Sometimes you got to go back to that old school way of doing things. Like in some
Okay.
cases right now, people, like I could use just, the internet and social media to brainstorm. Sometimes when my mind has everything in it and I just kind of need to see it laid out, I could maybe put that in my notes app or in some sort of digital document, but it sometimes does help to kind of start on a blank piece of paper and look at that as your canvas and then figure out. I
Mm.
usually will start from the top and work my way down. So by the time I get to the bottom, whatever it is I'm trying to figure it out, trying to figure out, is very clear by the time I get there. And so to give you an example, there's an exercise I do with some clients when it's an individual that comes to me and they're just like, hey, I want to work on my brand. These are the businesses I want to start, or this is what I already have in the works, but I don't know what I am. Like I do all these things. And sometimes we'll put at the top of the paper, like all the things that they do, that they want to do, like who do they think they are? And by the end of it, we get down to a very concise description of what is it that your brand serves, or what is your brand even, or can we actually tie in the fact that you want to exist in these three categories that have nothing to do with each other, but how does that actually exist as a brand? So yeah, I like whiteboarding things. I will always
That's
have
dope.
massive sticky notes in my home.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I went to school with a friend of mine, and I remember we were studying for an exam, and
Mhm.
I was writing all my stuff out, and then I looked at his notes, and they were all in diagrams, like literally diagrams. I was like, yeah, he's a doctor now. He's a professor now, so
It
I'm not
works.
surprised. Oh, yeah. It's definitely a creative way of doing it, and you got to do what works with you. You know what I mean? What works with you for sure. For sure. Okay, so let me ask this question now. And this is the we get into. Oh yeah, you know what? Before I ask that question,
Mhm.
is there like I know this is hard to say and maybe you don't, but is there one of those moments where you're like, this was the moment that kind of shifted my thinking in the brand and marketing industry, like working with a particular brand or so forth, that was like that experience that kind of changed how you view things?
Ooh. like changed how I view things in like what kind of way? Like in a positive way or a negative way or like a
In
good
a positive way. In a positive way, like a really good experience. Like, because
Ah,
you've worked with some pretty amazing brands, right? And
I
has there
have.
been, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I'd say one of the coolest experiences. Actually, there's been quite a few things. So one of my favorite experiences was last year. I got the opportunity to work with Kamala Harris, the former Vice President of the United States. I feel like I have to say those
yeah.
things, you know.
That's dope. That's dope. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
And
in case you didn't remember.
and
Putting it
so
out there.
right,
Right.
it was a really cool experience to work with her and her team. It was when she was running to become the president, and it was a conversation around the state of the Black male vote. And it was between Kamala Harris, Chris Paul, and CJ McCollum, two current NBA players. And it was just such a great conversation. But just in meeting her, which I'd only found out about a week or two prior, and so having to, you know, even work with like Secret Service and go through all of that, but just to like meet her in person. And it didn't all go exactly as planned, but it went amazingly in that I think at the time she might have known that maybe she was running, and we didn't at the time of this event. And so it was quite interesting meeting her for the first time, going up to take a photo with her and like the presidential backdrop setup. And I couldn't have been more nervous and like walking up to her and shaking her hand. But then by the time we actually got to the event space and she was on the stage and kind of walking us through just kind of like her thoughts on like, you know, the state of the Black male vote and like what she has done and what she's willing to do. She was just so lovely, just like such an absolute amazing woman. And I think because I relate to her in so many ways, and especially watching how she had to run for president and the kind of the negative things that were put on her by her opponent, and just knowing that she's a Black woman who had to show up every single day, dress the part, acting the part, 10 steps ahead, and yet still like there she was faced with some struggle. And so that's kind of the same plight that I have. And so I found that really relatable. But anywho, that was like a big moment for me. And having that photo, it seems kind of unreal. It almost seems like wax figure, but it was very real and very cool. So that was definitely one big one. Another is I've had some opportunity to work with some really cool athletes and artists. And so that's been fantastic. But as much as I think that that's amazing, like working with smaller businesses and individuals is equally as amazing. So I never want anyone to feel less than.
Right,
Just
right.
different projects challenge me in very, very different ways. And then I'd say one last thing would be what pushed me to actually start the scholarship that you had mentioned at the top of the call, or the intro,
Mhm.
was that looking at my industry and how many of us are in the rooms that I'm in right now, especially in Canada, there's not many.
Mhm.
And
Right.
it's it's at a point where if you see one other, you're like, ah, like, hey. And then if you were to see two or three, it becomes like a little bit of a joke, like, oh, there's three of us in the room. And I'm like, that shouldn't even be a
Mhm.
thing. And
Right.
um I think what changed my perspective on that was working with there's a company one of my clients is Social Change Fund United. The co-founders
Mhm.
are Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, and Chris Paul. And during our yearly or annual meeting that we had last year, in the room, everyone was Black. And I remember just feeling differently in that room. Just it was and we're
Mhm.
all talking about like marketing and impact, and it was just so incredible to leave that work trip and come back. And I was talking to one of my mentors and telling her just the feeling I had, and she's like, "You know what that was?" She's like, "It was because you had to be nothing else but yourself. You only had to show up with your knowledge. Like everybody there was beautiful, Black, educated, you know, successful. Like you had to do nothing but show up and just be yourself. You didn't have to care about anything else." And that stuck with me enough that maybe about like I don't know how many months later, I was like, what do I do to get more Black people in the room? Like how could I contribute? Like what am I doing to like, you know, create impact the same way that, those guys are. And so that's kind of how the scholarship came to be. And I did it at George Brown. I know this is like a long-winded, like roundabout answer, but
That's
did it at
great.
George Brown College, where I went to school. I do speaking engagements there. I sometimes am a guest lecturer there. And I was like, what a cool full circle experience, that I'm like teaching in some of the same classes I went to 16 years ago. But now if I have a scholarship for Black students in their final year of a marketing program to really help them focus on applying and getting in the marketing world versus, worrying about maybe having to pay off their tuition in that final year, was very, very important to me. So many
That's
moments.
dope.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, you got to so many things, but let me ask one question. Then I'm gonna get to something else real quick.
Yeah.
So how many you talked about in the room, right? How
Mhm.
many Black men do you see in the room when you're in these spaces? Do you see Black men? That's my
I do.
question.
I do. And it depends on the
Yeah.
industry. Even in, or I
Right.
should say the category. So in marketing, I would say that it feels 50-50 to me based on what I've seen, but then it really does depend on the category. So if you're in more of like the agency creative space, I do feel like I see more Black women. But then it depends, because if you're in the music sports space, I'm seeing more Black men. And so it varies.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
That's pretty
But
cool.
they
That's
are
pretty
there.
cool.
They are there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I had to ask the question. So I know the feeling that you have felt, because I went to a historically Black university in the
Mm,
US,
yeah.
and that experience was just
Yeah.
amazing, right? So
Yeah.
totally, totally, totally get it, you know. It's definitely a different experience when you're in a space amongst your people. And even me traveling to Africa last year,
I was
and
just
it
yeah.
wasn't it you know what it's the reverse when I was there, because I didn't feel like a Black man. I just felt like a man, right?
Right.
it wasn't even it wasn't even like I had to put that a
Right.
part of my identity, you know what I mean? So it was pretty cool,
And
pretty cool.
it's interesting that you say that. When I talk to friends of mine who live here, who were born and raised in Africa or the Caribbean, and when they're here, they're just like, I don't understand this whole thing where you guys are, making these jokes that we're not in the rooms, because where they're from, of course. Like, it would be odd
Yeah,
for
yeah,
someone
that's
if
all it is.
maybe
Yeah.
be in the
Right.
room. Right? And
Right.
so here it's like, obviously they understand it once they get into the industry, but it's so fascinating to me to hear their experiences, or even just yours, because I'm like, wow, I experienced that for 3 days. I could only imagine, you know, growing up that
Yeah.
way, or taking like an actual trip and experiencing that. So that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. And even the identity of a Black man in those places, they're like, no, I don't identify with that. I identify with, I'm Nigerian, I'm
Right.
Ghanaian, I'm that, but I'm not what you're talking about. No, I don't know what that
Yeah,
is, right? So,
that's so true.
you know, it makes sense. It makes sense. So tell us about, like, there's something else you on your website. You talk about a mentorship program that you're a part of.
Hmm. Um,
Um,
in
if
my
you can, of course.
Yeah, I'm a part of quite a few mentorship programs. But the one there, I think that I have on there is the sponsorship mentorship program that is in Canada, and it's
Mhm.
working with young marketers and branding folks that are in the sponsorship partnership world. And so each year they give you a mentee that you get to mentor for a full year. And what's been really cool with those that have worked with me is, in the first year, the person I had, she worked for the NBA. The second year, she had of an art gallery, and I'm like, why am I mentoring you guys? Like, mentor me. And then the third year right now, she works for a company where they work with like the Junos and Calgary Stampede and other big events like that. And so just like incredible young folks who are really, kicking butt in their field, but are looking just for some guidance. And at first I thought like, oh, they're probably going to want to just know more about sponsorship, which, I could help with that. But every brand is so, um, I don't know, specific in their needs and their objectives, that
Unique.
that might be hard for
Yeah.
me to do unless I really dive into the work that they're doing. But I found that they actually come to me for, the conversations of like, how do I talk to my boss about, getting a raise? And I might say, instead of calling it a raise, call it a pay adjustment. And, this is kind of this template that I use to ask for that pay adjustment, and the backup or the information that I have to kind of back up the percentage increase that I want. Or it might be, how do I navigate this conflict with a peer, or if it's with someone in upper management. And so I found that it's been super, I guess, helpful for them, but I'm also learning from them just because they have this, they're all probably in their like early to mid 20s versus me in my late 30s. And they just have that drive and that pizzazz that I used to have, which I still think I have, but sometimes, you've
They
been
used to what?
I still have, but like there's a
Yeah,
little, I don't want to call the
different energy.
different
Yeah,
energy, and I don't want to call the word
yeah,
like delusion when you're younger, but you just feel like you could conquer all things, right? And like you still feel that way
yeah.
when you're older, but
100%.
you have a bit of a reality check once you're in the industry for a while. And so as I
Yeah.
talk to them, it gives me that like sense of delusion back where I'm like, yeah, I could do absolutely anything. Like I'm going after it. And so I tell them all the time just how much they have impacted me as well. But yeah, mentorship is very important to me. Whether it's through that
Mhm.
company or just folks that reach out on LinkedIn who want to have a coffee chat and it turns into something more. Yeah, it's great.
That's good. That's good. And how long do you usually mentor in that program? Is it like 2 years, 3 years, or how does that work?
I think there's people that have just been going back every single year. Like as long as they'll have you, and as long as you're still relevant in the industry that you're in, I think it still
Mhm.
makes sense for you to continue on. So I can't see anything that would kind of pull me away from it, unless it's I'm over capacity from a work standpoint and I can't do it. But I still mentor the first person I mentored with that company since 3 years ago. We still get
Oh, and they
together.
can still connect to you. As
Right.
long as they're a part of the program, they can always connect to you.
No, even when they're not part of the program, you build a friendship at that point, right? And so like the
Right.
mentor
And you have a relationship with them outside of.
exactly.
Got it.
And
Got
so
it.
I still have a ton of mentees that I meet with for coffees or virtual chats, and I might have been introduced to them 10 years ago, but the conversations still need to be had.
That's dope. That's dope. That's amazing. That's amazing. That is amazing. All right. So let me ask you this question because we haven't gotten into this yet. So how do you effectively navigate the industry being a Black woman? Did we talk about that? I don't think we did.
No, we haven't. I
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
we might
yeah, yeah,
have
yeah. Okay.
that could relate to it, but not directly.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so for me, like how do I usually put I will say that I don't kind of walk around being a like try to work around it being a Black woman. Like I lead with it. It's my
yeah.
unique
Right.
superpower is how I look at it. The fact that I'm
Mhm.
one the only one in the room or one of a few in the room, I'm just like that immediately is my differentiator. So I'm going to use this, however I can to just show that, we show up professionally, we show up with the same amount of knowledge, if not more. And then also I know I'm automatically standing out already because I just look different. And so it's like, while I have all your eyes staring at me, I might as well make sure that, I keep you captivated with the words that are coming out of my mouth and that you know that I'm knowledgeable. And so it's definitely something that I lead with. I don't look at it as a negative. I think it helps me bring a different lens to things. It helps me with like cultural fluency. It gives me the ability to just kind of maybe see what others might overlook sometimes. And so I do look at it as my strength. However, don't get me wrong, obviously, we're Black. It comes with struggle. So it's not like I've never experienced it before. I do feel, as I mentioned, that's when I mentioned it, relating to Kamala Harris, is that I do feel like I have to show up, way more prepared, way more knowledgeable, always looking the part, to make sure that I get the respect before I even open my mouth. And I feel like I'm blessed that in many situations that is the case for me, but I know it's not the case for everyone. And it's not always the case for me. I do think that I could see the faces when there's a bit of doubt if I'm showing up. And then once I start talking, it's kind of like you kind of see like their shoulders relax and like their heads start to nod. And it's like, ah, okay, like I have you now. You know that I know what
Mhm.
I'm talking about. And I'm almost like, I wish that moment never happened, but I'm also kind of addicted to that moment where I just get to change their perception. Because I'm hoping that if I change their perception, they're just going to think of all Black women moving forward differently, right? Like, oh,
Right.
okay, they are smart. They put themselves together. And I think that there's a ton of women before me who've done a great job of doing the exact same thing, of having to show up in rooms and, be the best version of themselves, even though maybe someone else that doesn't look like us isn't even coming at 50% of that. But it's probably helped me to walk into a room and someone else give me a little bit more respect than they might have before because they've seen someone else that looks like me carry themselves well and, bring that same amount of knowledge. So yeah, I think there's perks to it that I make that I make up. And then there's obviously those struggles that you don't want to ignore, but I try not to let that kind of take over.
That's awesome. So you challenge indirectly the biases, the stereotypes, all of those things. Yeah.
Oh,
That's
100%.
amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Not putting me in a box. That's not happening.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. We thank you so much for sharing, your wisdom, your insight, your experiences with us today on Love Bay Radio and on the Champions Table. And as we say all the time, and I'm so glad that folks have tuned in. Men talk, women talk, but the truth can't lie, and the truth will set you free. Stephanie, Joseph Flats, we thank you for joining us today. And, have an amazing time. And we thank everybody for watching today. All right. So take care. We'll see you next time. All right.
All right.
Peace.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone. Take care.